Well, and I want to share something, Tom. It was important that people understand the Nazis, especially under the SS and the Ahnenerbe, the control of those looking for their ancient heritage, they absolutely achieved, and I've gone on record, people have heard me say this, but they have achieved and had achieved the ability to open the gates. And when even Werner von Braun, and I forget the other gentleman's name, said, well, it's not that we Germans are so smart, it's that we had help from other dimensions. And that's a pretty interesting quote. And what was more fascinating to me is it's kind of like this, too. When I came out with the book, Good Night, Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II, the thing that was astronomically important to that was the fact that the supernatural realm of evil spirits, and that which Aleister Crowley and his ilk, Jack Parsons, the whole crew at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, if you guys want to know where the cover-up is, it comes from not just NASA, but it comes from JPL, when it's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The point I'm trying to make is that you cannot separate advanced technology from spiritism and Stargate. Spiritism and Stargates go hand in hand. And for the record, when Antarctica was visited by Obama, by the Pope, and by what's his name, Kirill, the head of the, and I don't know what the official title is, Patriarch of, I guess, the Russian Orthodox Church, it was fascinating that prior to that, Russia had sent the equivalent of their Operation High Jump down there, supposedly carrying the Ark of Gabriel. The Ark of Gabriel is not the Ark of the Covenant. But what is suspicious to me is this, is that it was some form of power source. Now, over the years, in 2005 to 2008, I was on talk radio, I think it was in the Q-Files days, I'm pretty sure it was, and talking about how the generals, and you and I talked about this, the ones in the Spec Ops community were talking about all of that which was coming through the gates. Now, I know at that point, you probably thought, Steve has slipped the last part of his frontal lobotomy or lobe, But the point being is that everything was centered around Antarctica. And now what we're seeing is everything centered around Antarctica. And I'd like to put this into perspective. Everybody seemingly touched down or met at one point at Patagonia. Patagonia means big feet. Magellan specifically details, and I detail that in my book, the fact of running into the giants of Patagonia. And now the History Channel and others have come out and tried to discredit that. But, the point being is you cannot separate stargates from technology, advanced technology. And I want to put an end to this, that the giants are some kind of big oafs that walk around and club people and eat them. That's true. But their fathers taught their children, the fallen angels taught their children, the giants, all of the advanced astrology, astronomy, advanced science, technology, and all that. And so when I'm told by people that do nothing but go out and try and find that stuff in top-secret military stuff that doesn't even know, look, I'm not in the military. I don't know them. I just know them by code names. And so the thing is that they're looking for this stuff, and now we see everybody converging in the Antarctic and talking about the gates down there. That's something I don't think I made clear. It is the gates in the Antarctic that seem to have the world, pun intended, on edge and basically focusing on that. Now, how about, holes on the poles? We've only recently been getting new photographs, if you will, satellite photos of the holes in the poles that Admiral Byrd talked about. And that didn't appear. They have been censored for 17 years. Now they're showing up. Is it possible, Tom? This is rhetorical. I know your answer already. But let's do it this way, not put it rhetorically. Isn't it strange that Hillary Clinton, who is a practicing witch by her own statements, and she's talking about alien disclosure, There was a story Barack Obama's talking about alien disclosure, and everybody who's talking about alien disclosure, except, you and I and the Christians who are approaching this, I'm not saying we're the only ones, I'm saying, and the Christians who are approaching this from a biblical perspective, but it's the order of the day, and forgive me, it's the order of the day, and it won't go away.
Yeah, and it took me a moment. Somebody walked into my office while I was trying to do radio, and they were interrupting me, and I completely lost my train of thought. But they're gone, and it took me a moment to remember what I was going to say about Capital Eddie and the research that you and I were doing some years ago, quite a few years ago, I guess, the Q files. But a few years after your and my investigation, and I do think this was around 2005. But Capoletti followed the expeditions that they had with a book that he titled The Human Archaeology of Space, Lunar, Planetary, and Interstellar Relics of Exploration. So he continues to push this idea that there are artifacts of alien design that were here on Earth and in other places. And again, we're talking about a Penn State University guy that's calling to the United Nations to create rules around which these extraterrestrial artifacts can be investigated. But he wrote that book. It was published by McFarland Publishing, in which he discusses that very shadow of the Colossus Leviathan conspiracy that you and I had been investigating. And he admits to making 2 voyages at that time to the North Pole on board the Russian icebreaker Yamal. And he writes in his book, I've got the quote, during the second voyage, as we returned from the pole, we landed by helicopter on Rudolph Island in Franz Josef Land. And he then describes his team's excursion to the site that you and I had been doing news reports about to examine the remains, get this, of an enormous spacecraft. And now, he then goes on to claim that this was only a Soviet TB-3 bomber whose destruction the former Soviet Union had also buried as deeply as the government could. But again, how and why surveying a crashed airplane could be described as needing international laws or treaties to preserve alien artifacts on other planets, as well as having the power to alter humanity via aerospace archaeology, which is another thing that he goes into. It simply doesn't add up. But then he takes several pages of his book to focus on me and you. And I've got one of the quotes here. This aerospace archaeology, taken up as a central element of an argument for the presence of artifacts of extraterrestrial intelligence here on Earth, in a series of articles called Stargate, Ancient Rituals, and Those Invited Through the Portal. Remember those, Steve?
Yep.
And posted on the internet news sites, Raiders News Update, authors Tom Horn and Steve Quayle speculated that it was the disbelievers that were being conned, in this case by a specially created hoax that was in fact part of a larger cosmic conspiracy involving, you guessed it, me, end quote. Well, after republishing a whole large part of our investigation into the archaeology of space, Stargate, portals, interstellar relics, he then repeats his claim that there was nothing otherworldly that was discovered at Franz Josef Land, but it's just a Soviet airplane. He doesn't explain how it's going to lead to the next step in human evolution, which is also part of his book. He connects the next step in human evolution with the discoveries they made in
well, maybe, Tom, the United Nations was in the airplane parts business and needed a new bomber, and they had to go dig up one or drill for one in the ice. You see, what those guys do is they contradict their very premise. That's what you're bringing up, and I take that as a compliment. He's making his point, and when we show the Christian perspective on it, immediately, you know what I'm saying? He says, of course, this can't be the case, and says it's a bomber. It's like the Black Sea anomaly. It looks like the Millennium Falcon. It has energy still involved in it, and when they send down submersibles, the batteries are drained. It's like a episode out of the Bermuda Triangle. And so the point is this: covered up and covered over. covered up and covered over. Again, I'll say it, covered up and covered over. Or sometimes it's the other way, covered over and covered up. It's just like we've heard for years of the secret chambers, what's his name, the Dutch guy, Gattenberg or Gattenbrink's door, and then they do a cosmic ray, a gamma radiation penetration of the different pyramids in Egypt. And now what Timothy Alberino and the film crew found out in Bolivia is governments are how should I say this, bargaining behind the scenes. The newest underground citadel in Bolivia is basically pyramids and energy sources. So what I find interesting, Tom, is now, notice every headline. You carry a lot of them on Skywatch TV, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not saying this because Tom and I are friends, but his website is my favorite, and I draw from it extensively because I know, I'm not second-guessing, but I know since we've done so many shows what he's going for. Tom, you remember when we were ridiculed? And people need to hear this. We were ridiculed by some of the brightest transhumanists in the world. And now even they're talking about autonomous killing machines they may not be able to control. Excuse me? And
right.
The thing is that demon-possessed, sentient cyborgs, here's the thing that people don't get, and I want to make it. When Kurzweil wrote, his book on spiritual machines, well, let's just call it what it is. I mean, Stephen King beat him to the draw on that one when he did Christine. Demon-possessed. We've seen it in history. We've seen it in the history of divination and casting out demons. Look, we're not here trying to do a War of the Worlds broadcast with Doug and Joe. We're here trying to tell people. So, ladies and gentlemen, I consider it an honor when people say to us, well, of course, I'm making this most expensive, I'm talking about Capelito to Franz Josef Land. By the way, the island he landed on was the northernmost island of Franz Josef Land. I said Prince Joseph. Franz Josef Land. And the thing that's fascinating to me, Tom, is that area is complete. Not just the northernmost island, but there's a lot of stuff going on there and a lot of previous expeditions and a lot of UFO activity associated with that area.
Well, and it's interesting if you read his book. He talks about not only him and Penn State and their archaeological investigation and everything else. He talks about the former Soviet government and how much they wanted to bury as deeply as possible the massive craft that they had discovered, where Sony had been filming the Leviathan. So talk about contradictory. Here's a guy that on the one hand, at the university level, is calling for the United Nations to establish protocols to protect alien artifacts on this world and other worlds, and saying that the Soviet Union was working hard to bury as deeply as possible what had been discovered there. And then he's turning right around and saying, but we let Sony go in there and film the Leviathan thing as like a joke and a commercial. That just doesn't even make any sense. If you've got an area that you're highly trying to protect, the last thing you do is give a contract to Sony to go in there and make a Nintendo game commercial, right? Just simply, nothing that he was saying added up, including the fact that he took real issue with me and you. There was something going on there to capture, suppress, and control information around so-called alien artifacts. Were they demonic? What are they? I don't know, but it's the modus operandi of earthly governments. And by the way, it reminds me of another investigation that you and I did a decade ago, and this further back in 2003, when archaeologists discovered another magnetic anomaly, a stargate, if you will, in the ground where the Euphrates River once flowed, and that turned out to be, according to archaeologists themselves, the lost tomb of King Gilgamesh, the legendary ruler of ancient Samaria, known in the Bible as Nimrod. The New Testament is the spirit of Antichrist that rises during the end times and that is absolutely connected to the prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl and the final Roman emperor and the arrival of Antichrist. And isn't it interesting, Steve, given how At that same location, the book of Revelation says that the bottomless pit is located and the gates of the earth are going to open up. So does that imply that gateways to the underworld are located near the Euphrates, where ancient Babylon once stood? I think it does, actually. But whatever the case might be, within hours of the Gilgamesh find, the United States military, as you and I established at that time, they set up a barrier around the site. Remember this? They removed whatever was there, secreted it away to places unknown. The media, which had been actually sent there to cover the so-called Gilgamesh findings, didn't get to see anything. The military ran them off. They suddenly found themselves without a story. They were in the dark. And that included the Assyrian International News Agency, ABC News, BBC. And by the way, if there are people listening to this program that think we're making this up, just email me. I'm happy to send you. I still have all of the news articles of that time from the BBC and the INA and ABC, where they said, we have found the tomb of Gilgamesh. And then the military came in, it's all hush-hush, whatever's there is removed. Graham Hancock and Robert Dorval at the time, they wrote a book called The Message of the Sphinx. And they said that the U.S. and the Egyptian government worked together to block the investigators and the news reporters that had come in. And that it even included information around the Great Sphinx at Giza, the Hall of Records. I mean, they went into all kinds of stuff, right? But so we've learned from experience that when it comes to these gateways of the world and this idea that there is strategic, specific locations like we have verified in the 4-year investigation by me and Chris Putnam, and then in tandem with the work that you've done, Steve, with your documentary series, that any time you get into those areas, well, you're going to do what Timothy Alberino did in your most recent investigation. You get lucky. You get a person that can get you behind the doorway there inside the Jesuit offices inside the Vatican. But then what happens? All of a sudden, the guys with the high eyebrows walk in, start giving you a look. Next thing you know, you're being spirited away. They don't want you having that information. Very quickly, one thing that I started out on a moment ago, and somebody walked into my office here and interrupted me, was this idea about doorways and gateways and what I was doing some years ago that had to do with Crowley's magic portal and Hubbard and Parsons and their attempt at creating what they call the Babylon working. There's something here that's important that might have to do with this current election process. It's a matter of record that feminism, pantheistic monism have been sown into the public consciousness from the ivory towers of academia all the way back to Jack Parsons' dark invocations, which were carried out in the 1940s, and the Babylon working, which was intended to give birth to a dark being, a moon child. Crowley describes it in his work, and Crowley didn't like either one of those guys, Hubbard or Parsons. He didn't really like them. They were part of his institution, but he thought they were both stupid. But he described what they were trying to do as a moon child, which was using powerful energies, it literally 9th degree sexual magic, that were intended to open a doorway, a gateway, through which the goddess Babylon herself could be conceived in human form. And Parsons wrote in his own book that he believed that he and Hubbard had accomplished the task of incarnating the divine feminine, the spirit of Babylon in a series of rituals in 1946. In fact, in his biography, he actually preserves a celebratory statement regarding her embodiment in a child somewhere in which he believed that a child had been conceived. And it was a woman on earth, and that she would be born in 9 months of time. And he wrote about it. Babylon's incarnate on the earth today, blah, blah, blah. You're waiting the proper hour of her manifestation. Well, why am I bringing this up? Because if his magic can be believed, then one would expect that a female child would have been born in 1947. Interesting date, right?
Yeah, I know where we're going on this one.
And that she would later rise to international prominence. She would be an outspoken feminist, but she would grow to have global political clout in order to influence and even guide the nations of the world. Well, why that's interesting is because in all of the world, there was only one influential feminist born in 1947 that offers the promise of his infamous ritual. And she's now considered by many to be the front runner for the upcoming national U.S. presidential election, and that would be none other than Hillary Rodham Clinton. So, is she the fulfillment? Is a woman set to ride the beast? We're going to find out, I guess. But this idea that gateways and doorways can be opened through ritual magic is not something outside of Scripture. In fact, that's the reason why Revelation chapter 9 talks about those who are tortured by those things that come up out of the earth, because it says they repented not of their sorcery. The Greek word pharmakia, their use of ritual magic in order to attempt to open doorways to make contact with or even to incarnate entities from another